Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance by voices within the independent Catholic movement. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. And now, meet your hosts, Reverend Dr. Trish Sullivan-Bonney and Reverend Dr. Jayme Matthias.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I am Reverend Trish Sullivan-Bonney.
And in this episode, we have a very special guest, Reverend Trish.
Well, I'm really excited and even honored that Doug Pagitt is giving us an hour of his time to speak with us today. Many of you may know him. He's written 10 books on spirituality. He's been a very visible partner in renewal conversations in the evangelical world. He's an innovator. I first came across Doug's work when he and a group of folks started a community called Solomon's Porch down in Minneapolis, which was rethinking prayer and worship in the evangelical context. And it was a really exciting, interesting place to be. They were willing to do things differently, which I thought was great. He's also a very thoughtful citizen and an activist. And he co-founded an organization called Vote Common Good, of which he is the executive director. And that nonprofit is dedicated to it, and I quote here, inspiring, energizing, and mobilizing people of faith to engage in civic life. So Doug comes to us from his home right outside Minneapolis. I am also right outside Minneapolis. And Doug, welcome. We're happy to have you with us.
Well, Trish, thank you. So good to be here.
Anything
good to see you as well.
Anything I missed in that fantastic bio of yours?
No, that's very, very kind.
Well, you know, it really strikes me, you know, this line in your bio on your personal website, inspiring, energizing, and mobilizing people of faith to engage in civic life. Yeah. Gosh, I wish it wouldn't take a murder.
Yeah.
It's, you know, been a very heavy week for all of us here. One of the reasons I reached out, for those of you who are listening or dialing in, one of the reasons I reached out to Doug is he was sort of down at the front lines on a number of different events, and he has become, like a lot of people, a very effective citizen journalist. So he is where he is, but he is a participant observer. So he's not only witnessing, he's also got his phone out and he's recording, and he's letting all of us know what's happening in that moment in a way that's very powerful. Including the other night, the one that I thought I've got to reach out to Doug was, you know, you got to love Minnesota. If this horrifying tragedy was going to happen anywhere, I'm glad it happened in Minnesota, because there's a level of clarity here. So the other night, Doug was down at the Hilton, and there were hundreds, thousands of people.
Probably thousands of people, I'd say, yeah.
Making noise. And I'm sure you can share a little bit about that with us. But Doug, tell us about what you've been up to, what you're observing. We'd like to, you know, let people through our network, you know exactly what's going on in this region. There's a stunning amount of disinformation, and it's good to hear from people who are right there experiencing things.
Yeah, well, Trish, thank you. It's a nice invitation, and I'm so proud to be here with both of you and to be able to talk about these things. Look, as you mentioned, you know, for a long time, I've been a working pastor in churches and all that. And I've always been a bit of an activist kind of pastor. Without that being overly pronounced, I just thought the point of faith was to help create some common good. And the common good that our faith should generate in us, in our communities, in our religious institutions, I don't know, should be of benefit and blessing to everybody. It shouldn't be an extracting kind of a faith that takes away things from society, but contributes and adds things. And so different points of life, I've had different roles that I've played. In the last 10 years, it's been increasingly public around the intersection of faith and politics and faith and civic life. So I've spent a lot of time in that. And so there was a period of time where I would say things like, hey, I'm a activist pastor. And now I think I'm kind of a pastoring activist. Somehow the balance has sort of shifted because of just the work that we do. And look, a lot of this was driven in my own life by the election of Donald Trump and the overwhelming amount of religious support that Donald Trump received in 2016 and then again in 2024. That marked very distinctly for me a pathway of knowing that there's a lot of religious voters in America who don't feel like they have many options. And I heard that from thousands of people. I know it's true of millions of people. And so that's part of the work that we want to do. And Trish, as you know, Minneapolis has been the crosshairs of so many difficult things in the last 5 years. We've had a long history of things not working well for everyone in this city. But boy, in the last 5 years, from the murder of George Floyd and political assassinations of elected officials and school shootings, and now an ICE agent committing an act of homicide against an American citizen by shooting her in the face from 3 feet away. These are a lifetime worth of public tragedies, and they've all happened within 65 months of time. So there's hardly been a moment of let up. Walking down last week to the death site of Renee Good, which was just a few blocks from where George Floyd was murdered by a police officer. Just all the feelings came back, all the protesting, all the actions, all the having police put guns in my face, and all the things that went on when you try to be a person of nonviolent engagement in these environments. So yeah, it's just a lot, and everyone has their different thing they need to do. Some people, the best they can do is watch. Some people, the best they can do is write something on their phone or on their social media site. For some of us, we're going to get out in the streets, and we need all of us. There's no right or wrong way to do any of this, in my view. We just need all of us being able to do any of the things that we can possibly do.
Doug, what a delight to have you here. You and Reverend Trish are especially in the epicenter of so much political turmoil that is happening, including the events of this last week. So I know, at least for those of us in other parts of the country, we really appreciate the perspectives that the two of you bring to conversations like this. I'm particularly intrigued by this concept of vote common good, because the common good is such a deeply held Catholic principle, the intersection of faith and politics. I'm just getting back from Rome this week. And so, that is just, for me, the epitome of how it is that when politics and faith come together, what the Roman Catholic Church has become is essentially that. Tell us about the inspiration of this vote common good and what projects y'all have planned for 2026, because I have a feeling there are a lot of us who just want to be involved in bigger and better ways in 2026 than we were in 2025.
Yeah, well, thanks for noticing that. Look, the phrase "common good" is used in a lot of spaces and places, but nowhere with quite the level of importance and theological engagement as in Catholic social teaching. It's where I've learned of it, where the notion of the goodness and common goodness, not common sense. Now, there's nothing wrong with common sense. I want common sense politics, of course, but I don't know, sensibilities seem to be a little hard to find commonality on. But goodness, look, we might differ here and there on what's good, but we know what's no good. And for a lot of people, they feel like their political identity and their religious identity came as a package deal. This is just true in America. Like, if you grow up in religion, the chances are that there's going to be a side dish of a political party served with that religious identity. I wish it wasn't that way, but it is. We can all, think of Irish Catholics who are going to vote for Democrats, no matter what. We can think about Black church leaders who are going to be leaning toward voting for Democrats. We can think that evangelicals who in the last 40 years have hard bent into voting for Republicans and conservatives, and different religious communities have a built-in political identity. And that doesn't always serve us well, frankly. It's not a good thing. And when someone wants to change their political identity and not leave their faith identity, that's really hard. And the world that I was operating in, which was full of a lot of white Catholics and a lot of white evangelicals, they felt really stuck in their political choices starting in 2016, because for a lot of them, they could tolerate a lot of things out of Republicans, but boy, when Donald Trump as a person and as a policy came on the scene, they just didn't know what to do, because not voting was a hard thing, or not being engaged was a hard thing, or voting for people that weren't a Republican seemed like a near impossibility for so many people. We knew that there was a lot of work that had to be done to help people who wanted to change a political identity but maintain their faith identity to know how to do so. Now, our work is not primarily to go around and try to convince people that they should stop voting for Donald Trump or Republicans. We like to say, look, Donald Trump does all the work for you. He's like a self-cleaning oven. If you're for him, after all the things you've heard him say and heard him do, there's nothing we can say to convince you. We're not trying to get people to change their voting behavior if they don't want to. We're trying to get people who want to change their political identity and aren't sure how. And there are millions of people who feel conflicted in that work. So it's really a pastoral work in some ways, because we're trying to help people reconcile a deeply held faith with a deeply held public engagement. And there's not a lot of people doing that work. And so that's what we're particularly up to.
Doug, for those of us who are hearing about Vote Common Good for the first time, tell us, is this a Minnesota thing, and or is this something that, tell us how expansive and or extensive this is? Because I understand, for instance, that you all have a conversation coming up with State Representative Jayme Talarico here in Texas, who is my state representative. It seems that what you're doing is something that is far-reaching and important for us to know about.
Yeah, I live in Minnesota. But the rest of our team lives all over the country, and we primarily work nationally, and we primarily work in statewide elections or in congressional races. So we help candidates connect with faith voters, and faith voters think about their political identity all over the country. And we pay a lot of attention to certain places where we know certain races are going to have a lot of impact in them. And look, I voted for Republicans for most of my life up to a certain point, and haven't voted for one since. I've been somebody who's changed political identities. I've run for public office. I don't expect that politics are going to solve all of our problems, but it shouldn't be the problem. And for so many people, their political identity or the behavior of politicians really is a problem they're trying to solve. And we want to help people feel that there's something more they can turn to than simply their political ideology and political identity that's been given to them by somebody else. And we believe the common good can be that driving force. So if you start there, then you can call your political identity into service of the common good. And look, it's never going to break evenly. It's not as if one political party is all common good and the other side is all common no good. If that were the case, things would be much clearer. And the minute we start thinking that that's how it is, that it's that simple and it's that clean, that's where we really find ourselves in trouble. So we're calling people both to nuance, but then also to very particular, clear action, because when it comes to a vote, you have to pick one or the other. And we want to help people feel confident in making those choices that they're taking, because fundamentally, voting all over the nation, it's not really about policy. It's really about the voter feeling that their vote is a good thing, that they did a good thing and they're a good person. And we know this because we've talked to thousands of voters all over the country about this. And you boil it all down and you say, whatever your top set of policy issues are, for sure you're going to have those. But at the end of it, people say, I just felt like this made me a good person. And that's who I'm going to vote for, because that's fundamentally what we want to do. We want to do justly and love mercy and walk humbly. And people are trying to figure it out. And sometimes our faith communities are helpful, but sometimes they stay silent on issues they shouldn't be silent on, and they talk on issues they shouldn't. And sometimes our political parties make it more difficult for people of faith to feel like they can really engage in those political parties the way that they want to.
Yeah, that's so true, Doug. And I'm also thinking about the way the institutions are complicit in that. So I really can only speak mostly about Roman Catholicism. I'm a theologian. I teach at a local Catholic university, and I'm a very convicted church watcher, like a lot of people in my field. You know, I think about the last 20 years. Well, I think about your mentioning like the Irish people are going to vote for Democrats, right? Well, and my grandparents were all immigrants from Ireland. And yes, that was true, because they were all in poverty and they were also all marginalized. Catholicism for a very long time was ghettoized in the United States. A lot of Catholics today don't remember that piece of our history. I'd encourage everybody to watch the movie Cabrini if you want to get a sense of how oppressed ethnic Catholics were. But with my parents' generation and the evolution of Fox News into a very effective propaganda channel, a number of people in my family started shifting their political alliances, definitely after 9/11. And they really bought what George Bush had been saying to this country. So it's just not so simple anymore. And the Roman Catholic Church has been very artful in reducing our politics to single issues.
Yep.
So in my generation, forever it was abortion. That's still there. Now it's the way we treat the gay community and trans people. That's the new drum they're banging on. I think what's really interesting about this moment is the disruption of the single issue. Because now the Catholic communities are in that grave dilemma of, we're very clear on the fact that we're supposed to welcome the stranger, that immigrants are a big part of our faith community, that you can't brutalize people this way. And so now there's this moment, which I think is potentially a fruitful moment, where we're just shaking the mortar around, single issue voting. The other thing that I think is shaking it up for Catholics, there was always a lot of guilt and sin-driven manipulation, right? If you part from the way the church sees this, then you are potentially in error, and that could have some grave consequences for your soul. People just don't believe that stuff anymore. And that also gives a little freedom to say, well, what is it that I really think? But that said, white Catholic women went overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in the past election, overwhelmingly. I don't know what it's going to take for us to, really help this moment of disruption bear fruit.
Well, I don't know how much we want to talk about the ins and outs of our political work. I'm always glad to talk about it, but I know it doesn't always fit every context. But if you want to talk about that, I would make some suggestions about what we believe.
Do it. Absolutely. Jump in.
I think it is single issue, but I don't think it's a policy issue. I think it's a likability issue. And the single thing is that most voters of faith in America think Democrats don't like them. This is not a likability issue like, hey, which presidential candidate would you like to go have a beer with? It's a likability issue where in polling, we find out from most Americans, but certainly religious Americans, they're convinced that Democrats don't like them and don't want them. And I will tell you, there is no one less like a good Catholic or a good evangelical than Donald Trump. They don't vote for Donald Trump because he's like them. They vote for him because they're convinced that he likes them and he has their best interest in mind. And frankly, Democrats who I work with all the time and we love, and I'm committed to them, rescuing this country's political movement from a renegade MAGA movement. They give off an attitude about religious people that like, hey, if you're religious, that's fine, but please don't bring it up. Don't talk about it, don't share it, to the point that all the organizing that we do around politics nationally, the Democratic voter file called the VAN, which is the way that the database that's used to know, if somebody goes door to door, is going to send literature or any of this, to know if someone has a propensity to be a part of the Democratic or the Independents or the Green Party or the Republican Party. The one that the Democrats use doesn't track for religious identity. They removed religious identity as one of the categories. Literally don't know people's religious identity. Where Republicans for 40 years have been organizing first, second, or third sort around religious identity. So you have this thing happening in America where people say that Republicans want to see religion, especially Christianity, in America succeed, and they believe that Democrats want to see Christianity in America recede. Now, that's sometimes true, sometimes not. It's conflicted, but it's what people think and what they feel. So if what probably happened to your parents and others, and I've heard this from a lot of people, they're like, hey, I didn't change. The Democratic Party changed on me, right? Like, so, okay, this kind of thing, which there might be some truth in it, but also they used to believe that the Democrat had their best interest in mind. They thought that they cared about them, and they don't. And so some of our work is just helping. Like, it's pretty simple. We think there's actually 6 magic words, and they are from candidates to religious voters. I like you, and we need you. Like, literally meaning it, truly saying it, and actually knowing something can go so far in helping people feel like, oh, I think I would be safe here. Now, as a caveat, and I'm not a Democratic I'm not a Democratic operative, and I'm not a Democratic basher, but most Americans feel like the Democrats don't like them. I have a friend who runs a big atheist group, and she's one of the leading atheist and free thinking political organizers. And she said to me the other day, Doug, the only group that Democrats like less than religious people are us atheists. So somehow the Democratic Party has figured out how to tell religious people we don't care for you, and to tell atheists we don't care for you. So something's going on that needs to be resolved and needs to be solved here. And it's probably not going to first be politics, because if you don't feel like someone likes you, you're really less interested in that person being in charge of something that matters to you, right? So we have to work on this issue across the board in politics, that people frankly don't like each other in America, and politicians don't like a whole set of people in America, and a lot of that has to be solved. So that's kind of the basics, I think, of the work that we do. Because when you ask people in polling about policies, they agree with Democrats 60-70% of the time. Once you attach a Democrat name or candidate to that, it drops into the 30s or sometimes into the 20s of support. So there's something going on that's more than let's try to make an argument for the best policy position. It's this sense of identity and exclusion and feeling left out and not feeling at home in America.
Doug, I am absolutely fascinated by this, by the data that you're sharing on polling on Democrats, especially when it comes to religious affiliation. A bit of background on where I come from. So I was raised in the middle of the cornfields of Ohio, where so many voters are single issue voters, especially in strongly Roman Catholic communities. I mean, the anti-abortion movement is just so strong there. And every time I go home and see billboards and yard signs that reflect that, it just makes my stomach turn to think that I came from a place where it was where politics essentially came down to a single issue of conscience. So to hear what it is that you're saying, I'm fascinated by that, because I'm a former elected official myself, 2 terms on the school board here in Austin. For 8 years, I served our 130 public schools here. So I'm very familiar with the van. Uh, and I just am absolutely fascinated by the fact that, that it doesn't collect data, say, on a person's religious affiliation or lack thereof, which could be a very fascinating
Right.
point to be able to add to the van. One of my questions for you, Doug, is simply this. It's what I find myself so troubled by these days and weeks and months is simply the fact that there are so many people who claim a religious affiliation. I am Christian, I am Catholic, whatever it is that they're claiming, and yet at the same time are espousing and or supporting some very un-Christian values. For me, that just creates a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance. And I don't know if there's a perspective that you and or Reverend Trish might be able to share to help those of us who are trying to think through this and trying to make sense of how it is that people who call themselves Christian or Catholic, as we're seeing in, say, this weekend's, in the words and actions that we've seen by J.D. Vance, our vice president, how it is that a person can profess one thing and then so openly, so blatantly espouse something that is so contrary. I welcome insights for the sake of our listeners. What's happening here?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, I think it's the classic human response. Like the value of a faith tradition is that we're able to look at those who've preceded us and try to figure out what's particular to our moment and what feels like it's part of a pattern. So in the biblical narrative, the Jewish narrative first, and then becomes the Christian narrative, and then also becomes part of the Islamic narrative. You have the beginning of the story, starting with Adam and Eve, and they have 2 sons, and the murder rate reaches 25%. Brother kills brother. The narrative wants to tell us that it has something to do with religion, that religious offerings were made. One was accepted as valid to the Lord and one was not, and the brother turned in rage and killed the other brother. So the son of God's son, the grandsons of God, one is murdered and one is a murderer. So I think what it's doing is it's telling us a story that we see to be true, that people are going to end up living these contradictory lives. So what do we then do? And then you can pull that all the way through the Jewish narratives, and our rabbis have helped so many of us understand how you see that play out, where you end up with a whole temple system, that's so complicated and so exclusionary and so dominant and so cruel. The Sabbath system becoming so cruel that people are allowed to die rather than to be intervened with, and someone would have to break the Sabbath, to the point where you have the prophets saying things like, how many sacrifices do you want? How much blood could we spill, right? What does the Lord really require of you? Not sacrifices, but to walk justly and to love mercy and to do kindly. And then you get Jesus, who comes along and he's like, okay, so he pulls together a bunch of disciples. One becomes a betrayer, one becomes a denier, one tries to kill someone, swings a sword and tries to, chop a man's head, cuts his ear off, all while Jesus is preaching, the Prince of Peace stuff and like nonviolent, but then you have this reaction. So, and then we could just keep going, right? We could keep going through the traditions. So you pull this all the way through the traditions, whether it's the Protestant traditions and their violence or the Catholic traditions or Islamic traditions. So you have this movement of hypocrisy. So when we see a J.D. Vance thinking that he gets to articulate Catholic theology more than the Pope, when we get Steve Bannon, who wants to dethrone the Pope and create a separate papacy in some taken over castle on the other side of a river, okay, what we're seeing is a pattern. I like to call it non-identical repetition. You get this non-identical repetitive pattern being created, not exactly the same, but there's the pattern again. So what do we do when we're faced with this kind of hypocrisy? Well, as an evangelical, I love to sort of center my stuff around the Bible parts that I can pick from sort of Jesus through, the first 50, 60, 70 years of, canonization in there. And you say, the thing that's going to drive us home here is love and kindness. What a lot of people only hear at a wedding is that, love looks like 1 Corinthians 13. Actually, it wasn't designed for a wedding. It wasn't a wedding homily. It was a bunch of people who were turning against each other, living in greatest level of hypocrisy. The people in Corinth, like some people are not eating, some people are creating sexual sin that's harming others, some people are enslaving each other. And into that context, the great apostle says, love is kind. Love is good. And then goes on and on to describe the nature of love, and then says, and look, if you accomplish all kinds of things and you don't have love, it's just a clanging gong. It's just a bunch of noise. It's a bunch of nothing. You can't love God and hate your brother. Like, there becomes some things that were like, okay. And look, I don't think the hippie movement actually paid off all that big, but if I get accused of being a modern day hippie, I'm fine with it. But I think we have to lean forward into postures of love and engagement. And that means being prophetic. That means being on the street. That means sometimes nonviolent protesting and finding ways to allow love to break through the cracks. And so I'm not as bothered as some people are by hypocrisy. I'm like, well, what do we expect? I mean, look at any one of us, frankly. Our own lives are just full of nonsense, We are so humans, for some reason, seem to be the only sophisticated animals that are just, bent on self-harm. Like, why we're so comfortable with self-harm and therefore harm to others is a real problem of consciousness. And, but that's where we find ourselves. So, okay, that's my biblical sort of like All right, what do? We take the hypocrisy on straight away and we call people to something else. And frankly, we've gotten to a point in this country where we've stopped calling people into a better world. There's a lot of reasons why progressively leaning people theologically or culturally or socially have stopped that. They think somehow it's overly intrusive or takes away people's agency or whatever, but it's not working for us. We literally have to start inviting people into a better way of living and not just tolerate that every behavior comes from somebody's social situation, which is unchangeable. People change. Look, we've watched very progressive people become Trumpy conservatives, you know? That change doesn't only go one way. We work with a group called Leaving MAGA, which is really a fascinating group. Some of your people might really, leavingmaga.org. And it's started by a big MAGA person who left, and he's being very public about calling people to be public about their leaving narratives. And it's so heartening, not because I think we're going to win politically for the side I want, but it's just a good reminder that none of us are stuck. We can change. People really do change. Not enough, not all the time, not on every issue, but it's not impossible. And we can grow, and human flourishing can become more consistent, and all the rest of that. So,
Well, Doug, after this podcast, I'm going to get online and find you a really good tie-dye shirt. Because I like the idea that you're a kind of a latter-day hippie. I think some of us are going to have to be there. We were, my very first protest, I was, I think 8 years old, when my parents walked down to our county seat in Bergen County to stand and witness after the assassination of Dr. King. And they walked down there with my sister in the stroller and my other sister and I walking alongside them a long distance. So it really made an impression.
What a gift.
Right? What a gift. I'm very lucky I was raised by those people. But, so I'm very struck by, the whole collapse of identity as not being a new thing. I think that's really gives me some pause, and I need to think about that. But one of the things that have been concerned about, as someone who you would definitely say is a progressive Christian, I'm an ecumenical Catholic priest. I'm a woman who's a Catholic priest. I mean, that says it all right there, right? Is the collapse between Christianity and Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
And, you kind of, pointed toward it when you were talking earlier. And, I think, when we say, what do we do about that? I think about the courageous people like, Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the Confessing Church that was willing to step outside the mainstream Lutheran community to say, we have to decry this. And Catholics were very complicit with what happened in Germany. I mean, there's a very shameful story of what all those bishops and cardinals did. The Vatican was vacated. The ghetto around the Vatican was vacated right under their windows. They saw the Jews being vacated. So it's not like Catholics are not, responsible for this stuff too. But, it's hard to talk to people about, and I'm trying to get more bold about it, about the idolatry of Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
We're really called to have one God, and it is not this federal government. But it's, but because people's identities they're so embedded in each other, it's even hard to talk about that. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about your experience down in Minneapolis while we have some time with you, because I know you've been down there a lot. I've also been down with Isaiah, Minnesota, which is an interfaith Christian coalition, and out doing mosque visits here in my city and doing some other things. I'm wondering if maybe you could share what you've seen. There's a lot of disinformation being promoted about how, how violent we all are and all of this other stuff. What's it been like? What have you been seeing, and what's your experience?
I've been in the Minneapolis area for a number of events in the last few days. The day that Renee Good was killed, my schedule allowed me to get down there 1:00 in the afternoon or something. So I was right there. And like a lot of protest or gatherings or rally events that happen spontaneously, there were a lot of things going on. There was, frankly, a lot of trauma. There was a lot of people remembering. It felt so much like 2020. the flat out truth is that winter does a lot. It tames and quells in a way that, a Memorial Day weekend didn't. We were in lockdown in 2020. We're not now. So there were a lot of factors that were different. But what was the same was the people of Minneapolis in that same neighborhood looking at each other and saying, we're in this together. Now, the difference this time, frankly, was that the Minneapolis police officers were not the people for whom the direct murder was associated. So they were protecting a space, but it didn't feel in opposition to people. There was a lot of yelling about ICE, and there was one federal agent that I saw, an FBI person with an FBI jacket on, and the attention turned directly to that person and became a whole lot more yelling and all the rest of it. But something is different. So for people who feel like, I got a call from my sister-in-law today. She lives in New York. She used to live in Minneapolis for a very long time. She knows it very well. She's really worried. And I was like, it's not a direct response, because look, we know that if something happened in 2020 here, that Trump would create martial law in this city and try to take it over and would put federal troops on our streets. There's no doubt in my mind. And I think it's politically motivated because his political opponent in the election is the governor here and all the rest of it. So I think there's a lot going on. But people are angry, and they know where to direct that anger. And so the direct call for ICE to get out of our city is where that's going. And then I was down at the noisemaking event outside the hotel where the ICE agents are sleeping in downtown Minneapolis, which has been going on for weeks. They've been trying to, they're not there overnight. I have a bunch of people that are like, what do you want? A bunch of ICE agents running around sleep deprived? And I'm like, look, these man children don't need to be coddled overnight. They can figure out how to sleep in a hotel room with some background noise, right? Put some headphones in or white noise machine on, you'll be fine. Like the idea that we have to protect law enforcement so they don't act badly and hurt American citizens, that's just madness. That we are not in the point, at least I'm not willing to live at a point where if we're going to give someone guns, we don't trust that they have the ability to work off of 3 hours of sleep. I mean, it's just crazy talk that people are portraying here. So, but we're out there trying to raise a noise about conscience. And my point of that, and I'll be down there any night that I can, is if your conscience isn't keeping you awake right now, we hope this will, and you should consider resigning your position. Look, you're not in the military. You didn't make a 4-year pledge where you can't quit. You can quit. Just say tomorrow morning, I left my gear in the room. I'm not doing this anymore. So protests are meant to testify about something. And it seems to me there's a pretty clear call for what we can do, that the Trump administration utilizing masked agents under the auspices of ICE to come in and abduct people and put them into federal custody for processing is not something we should ever be comfortable with and should ever want to be comfortable with. And I agree that people can disagree on how we should handle what's going on with our federal immigration system. We do a lot of work around immigration. We do a lot of work around Christian nationalism. I know how those two things are interlocked together. I know what's behind this anti-immigrant movement, which is really a Christian nationalist movement to try to remove certain people from our country. But the situation in Minneapolis is that people who are trying to live their regular lives are once again having to deal with the fact that the federal government is not the solution to problems. It is the exact it is the cause of the problem.
It strikes me, though, that we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that Renee Good is not the first person to be killed by this militia. And I've done a lot of work around white privilege and anti-racism work. Many of us have been called to it for a long time, but certainly in the wake of George Floyd's murder, that was really a wake-up call, I think, for the white community, a certain corner of it, to say, wait a minute, I need to stop demonizing the Black Lives Matter people and start listening to what they're saying. Mm-hmm. And now when a white mother is gunned down, that is part of why I think we'd be lying to not say that that didn't have an enormous impact on our region, because now I think there's an enormous part of the community saying, oh my God, this could happen to me.
Yes.
This could happen to my wife. This could happen to my sister, my friend, my neighbor. And so there's a kind of an eyes wide open reality that I'm seeing.
Totally.
I'm wondering, one of the dilemmas I'm having is, how do you talk to people about this? And maybe from your work with your nonprofit or your own experience, one of the things that has devastated me in the past week, well, first, of course, just realizing that yet again, practically walking distance from where I'm sitting, we had another murder by, law enforcement. I was beside myself. Plus, a lot of my friends where I'm located are out driving around, documenting ICE vehicles, videoing, blowing whistles. I mean, I'm involved with various things that's going on. And so the idea that, we're kind of extra, that it's kind of lawless right now. I don't know if you saw the video of the young guy being grabbed at the Chipotle yesterday, but the guys who grabbed him weren't even in uniforms or anything. They were like, it was like a plainclothes grab, or it was just thugs taking something into their own hands. I have no clue what it was. But the thing that really sent me over the edge last week was people I know who would not even believe their own eyes.
Yes.
That I'm just put into silence in that. Like, how can you, knowing what the law is in terms of, what these people are allowed to do and not allowed to do. We all know what the police are allowed to do and not allowed to do. But when you see someone pull a gun and shoot someone in the face, and you can't somehow put that together with the Beatitudes, or with the discussion of the community in Acts, or the Paul's letter to the Romans, or wherever you want to anchor it, like, what do you? I'm speechless. Like, what do you say to people in the face of that?
Well, look, these are the deep questions, right, that we have to deal with. I think a couple of things have been meaningful to me and that we center our work around. One of those is to try to, if we're going to talk to someone who differs with us, to try to figure out why we're doing it. Look, sometimes we need to talk to someone who differs from us because it's going to help us, because we have to get it out. We have to get it off of our chest. We have to make it clear to that person we have something to say. There's a sense that a lot of us feel victimized by this horribleness, and we just need to say it to someone who represents that view that we think is harming us. We're not really trying to work. We don't care how they view what we're about to say. We're saying it because it's coming from us. That's a valid reason. But if that's not your reason, if you really do want the person to change their idea and their mind, that's a different kind of communication, right? Then it's then it's a Martin Buber I-thou relationship thing for people that are into this kind of stuff, right? You have to start with the other person as a full engaging partner to invite them to go to another place with you. If we don't recognize that people hold beliefs because those beliefs support other identities and other ideas, then we feel like people are never going to change. But there's a lot of people who believe things not because of the content of the belief itself, but because of what the belief does for them, how it functions in their life. So we ask people to consider, when they're going to engage with somebody across difference, 3 questions. One is, what does that person believe, the other person? Why do they believe it? Those things are pretty straightforward. But the third is a little more complicated, and that is, what function does that belief play in their life? Because if we don't know what it's doing for them, we don't know if it's a belief that holds a lot of other things that they really want to defend, that feel good to defend. So if you run into a conservative person who believes that we should have law and order, Now, this is hard for me to say with a straight face when the convicted felon president sends people in to enforce law and order, while people say, well, that law and order doesn't count. It's hard for me, but if they believe that it's law and order that they're upholding, then it's not about the particularities of the issue. So you have to know, does the person think, what is it we're actually talking about? So I want to give one example that happened when we were in, do you remember a year and a half ago, or maybe 2 years ago now, there was a group of self-proclaimed Christian nationalists called the Army of God that wanted to go down to the southern border with a big caravan of diesel vehicles. The Trucker Brigade was going to go down to Eagle Pass, Texas, and become a self-proclaimed militia. Remember when that whole thing happened, this Army of God? Well, our organization operates a bunch of buses and things, and so we had a bus available to go. So we hopped in it from Minnesota and drove down there to support the people in Eagle Pass, Texas. We knew a lot of the organizers. We'd been involved in events, Eagle Pass. So we're there in Eagle Pass, putting up some resistance to this Christian nationalist thing. Because we're like, okay, if the white Christian nationalists are going to come rolling in, a bunch of white non-Christian nationalists are going to meet them there. They're not going to move, unimpinged. So we're engaging on the street. There's protests on both sides of the street. There's Trump supporters on one side. There's people from the town on the other side. And I was moving back and forth, talking to people and all this. And there was an older guy sitting on the ground with his wife on the curb. And he said, hey, can I ask you something? You seem like you know the people on the other side of the street. He was on the MAGA side. And he said, why do they think we hate immigrants? And I said, well, it might be because you're wearing a Make America Great Again hat. And this week, at the time, Donald Trump had said, immigrants are polluting the bloodstream of America. And he said to me, Trump didn't say that. And I said, yeah, oh no, he did. And then we went back with an I'm rubber, you're glue thing for a little bit. And he said, well, you probably have a phone in your pocket. Why don't you show me where he said it? So I quick Google search, I show him the quote. And he said, well, that's what someone said, he said. I said, do you want me to click on the video button above there? He said, yeah. So he clicks on the video button. The man's holding my phone. He watches Donald Trump say, immigrants are polluting the bloodstream of America. There's a pause. He hands me back my phone and then said, well, he may have said that once, but I'm not sure that's what he meant. Okay, now I'm in a moment here where I have to decide what's going on. Here's a guy experiencing, as Father Jayme said a minute ago, cognitive dissonance, what's described in psychological terms as cognitive dissonance, because this man does not believe that immigrants are polluting the bloodstream of America. He went on to tell me a story. He lives in San Antonio. He does a bunch of work with immigrants. He thinks they're really important, but he also buys into all this other stuff. So he's now stuck in a situation where something he believes, he hears his political leader say the opposite, and he doesn't know what to do with it. This is, I think, what's happening when people think ICE is here to do a good thing. Now, I think ICE is here to do a terrible thing. So we start in different places. So when I see them behave terribly, makes sense. It fits my frame. For them, it doesn't fit the frame. So what I suggest people say to somebody is this: would it matter to you if, and then you can present your idea. So if someone says, I support ICE, they have to defend themselves, she was trying to run them over, I say to them, would it matter to you if her car was not coming at him? Would it matter to you if she was trying to get out of the way because a man was opening her door and she was afraid? Would that matter? Because if they say it wouldn't matter, okay, well then that's all I got. But if, and the question itself is the work, right? Now they have to ask themselves, would that matter to me? Would the information matter? So asking permission to introduce a new idea is a necessary way to engage with someone across radical difference. And here's the thing, Trish, I think you're getting at. For all the work we've done in our society to help people understand difference, and I love those organizations, I've done a bunch of work with many of them, like come and meet a person from a different faith, come and meet someone from a different culture, let's do cross-cultural exchange. It's beautiful and powerful. But most people's problem is not that they disagree with someone they've never met. Their heartbreak is because they disagree with someone who they love. We are heartbroken because family and friends and people in our community, this is all fracturing the thing of the people we love. I mean, I have to think about my own son, and I think about my own father-in-law, and people are talking about their children and their parents, and we have neighbors for whom we adopted foster children from their foster home, lived next to them for 20 years. After Trump was elected, haven't spoken to them. They moved. Just fracturing of relationships. So the heartbreak is not, how do I understand someone who's so different? It is, how do I reconcile someone who's so close to me? You know what I mean? Which is why I think the biblical narrative of brother turning on brother, because we say this story like if we would just see one another as family, we could all get along. Really? I mean, the one group we know we could have the most tear down fights with is our family. So we have to have something more than familial bond. And that is what all of this nonsense that the MAGA movement has created in this country is, rending families apart. And that's what we have to figure out how to heal is, and how do we engage with each other, and how much can we tolerate from those that we love who differ from us on important issues. So self-checking here is super important. Like, what's the goal of talking to people who differ from each other? And if we go into any conversation to change the other person and not willing to be changed, we just, well, I don't even have to say the next sentence. We all know how that goes, right? That's a nightmare.
Speaking of changing, Doug, we find ourselves in the middle of the month of January, a traditional time of making New Year resolutions. In fact, I love the fact that this month is named after a Roman god, Janus, that famous two-faced god, with one face looking back as if looking back on the year behind us, and another face looking forward as if looking toward the year ahead of us and or the next 3 years ahead of us as a nation. My question for you becomes one of resolutions and or calls to action. What it is, for me personally, for instance, 2026, I made a resolution that in my daily Substack, I am going to be more pointed and more direct about how it is that we as Catholics, particularly as progressive Catholics, cannot be silent, cannot be complicit in what's happening, but that we need to stand up and be active and challenge what is happening that is so contrary to the values preached by Christ and by our religious tradition. I guess my question for you is, as our listeners and those, as we as people of faith are looking toward the next year or 2 or 3 ahead, what resolutions and or calls to action come to mind that you and others might suggest for us as we try to make our way through the dark valley of the weeks and months and years ahead?
About a week and a half ago, I fell and hurt my left wrist, and I had to wear a little wrist brace, which meant that I took my watch and put it on my right wrist. And this is a thing that I think I've done since like junior high, when they were like, it's some project in, I don't know, health class or something, where you had to do everything sort of backward, like start with the other foot or something. But wearing a watch on my other wrist was so incredibly disorienting. You know, when I would look at it, I would just feel it. It was very self-evident. Like, I've never think about the fact that I have a watch on my left wrist. As soon as it was over there, it felt enormous. I'm like, why do I have this giant watch? What am I even doing with it? My coordination was off. Like, it was really perplexing. And it was such a good reminder. Maybe this is how old men talk about things, but it was sort of like, hey, I need to keep creating stretch and balance here, and do the counter work. My wife's a yoga instructor, so she talks a lot about full, balance and bending, and how you sit all day. You do something in the reverse. So I've been thinking a lot about that in how we engage in social and political issues, and I think it's good for me, and I wonder if it wouldn't be good for some others at times to think about just reversing some things, switching the order. Maybe you've decided you're not going to consume certain information any longer. You're going to go on a fast, and maybe you're going to take in some other information. Like, I don't know, I have some friends that are like, I'm going to be in a group where every week we're going to exchange music with each other because we just need to hear something different. Like the old song, all the songs we know and that we always play and that we like in our Spotify, whatever, that thing is so curated to my ear. I need something else and something new. So they're going to be in a music exchange. I know some people who've said after 7:00 at night, no more talk about politics. I'm not going to do it. Other people are like, I've never talked about politics, and now I want to do it every single day. Like every day I'm going to take in some new Substack. I'm going to listen to a new podcast. I'm going to watch something because I've been politically unengaged. I guess all my point here is 2026 is going to be unlike 2025, unlike 2020 or 2019 or 2018. Whatever we're going to need to do in 2026 is the best of what served us till this point and something new. So developing some new capacity, some new ability, some new set of resources. At the end of this year, we need to have developed, all of us, some new way of resilience, because resilience is about adaptability. And sometimes you just have to adapt on the fly, and sometimes you can adapt on purpose, right? You can literally build in adaptive patterns. So I would encourage people to pick something and to go easy on yourself and to basically ask that question that I know is a big thing in AA. I know it's also big in a lot of religious traditions, but that is to pray for the wisdom to know the difference between the things that are yours and the things that are not. Now, we all manage anxiety different. I'm big into the Enneagram, and I think there's like 3 big types of people. Some of us respond by anger. Some of us respond by anxiety. Some of us respond by fear. So look, some people manage their anxiety by taking in as much as they can. Some people manage their anxiety by turning it off. Some people manage their anger. So I don't think there's one way to do it, but we should recognize that we're probably going to respond somehow out of shame or anxiety or anger, and to figure out what's driving us and what sort of gets us kind of up and moving, and then try to not get triggered daily as much as we are, because the cortisol effect of emotional crisis on a daily basis, it's really bad for our bodies. It's bad for our spirits. It's bad for us long term. It just has a lot of devastation. And I think we need to find ways to care for each other and be cared for.
As somebody who's been in the 12-step movement for a long time, Doug, I appreciate you mentioning the Serenity Prayer, because it really is pure genius, and written by somebody who was at the front lines fighting fascism.
Yes.
Which people forget, but this idea of taking life one day at a time. I had the gift of being on Matt McNeil's show on AM 950 last week. I am the spiritual advisor to the Matt McNeil show. You might not know that.
I used to have a show on that station, so I was on right
so I love
Yeah.
Matt McNeil, but one of the things I was talking about is the cost of rage. And outrage. If you're not even at rage, maybe you're just at outrage, or maybe you're in despair, or maybe you're in fear. And, there's so much wisdom in the 12-step movement, in which I've been a part for many decades, is, including that little acronym. So I offer it to our listeners of HALT, don't get too hungry, don't get too angry, don't get too lonely, and don't get too tired. And this idea that every one of us can do something, and we all can't do it all. I don't have to go down outside the Hilton and video the guy, everyone who's banging, because my friend Doug is doing that, right? And he's going to help that, that I can go and stand outside our local mosque on Fridays to reassure people who are coming in to pray. I can make the choices that are right for me in my location with my capacity. And I also can give myself permission to pace myself.
Yes.
Because I think, one of the things is that we all got to let in is this is not going to be a short-term thing. We're dealing with this immediate crisis, but this is going to be a long haul. We have to stay strong, and we have to, because one of the privileges, I have as a white cisgendered woman is to throw up my hands and say, well, I can't deal with it anymore. right?
Yep.
Because I have the capacity to hide out from it. Whereas my friends in communities of color, my friends who are Muslim, they don't have the capacity to hang out, for check out from what's going on. So what are we going to do to, sustain ourselves as we go through this together? I also think that community is a critical part of it. Yes. That, we have had this longstanding trope in the United States of self-reliance.
Yeah.
And then we had a period where the churches were very big and vibrant. And that was a primary place that people found community, for better or worse. There was a shadow side to it, admittedly. But now we're back in that question, like, where are you going to create community for yourself so that you're not a lone ranger, that you're not left alone with what is going on for you, where you're getting some solidarity and support with people of like mind? It's a really important question for all of us. And I'm not saying everybody needs to get back to church, although we had 4 new people on Sunday, and I know why they were there. They were there because the world is pressing in on them, and they knew we were a safe place to come and pray and fill back up, So it's a long game.
Yeah, I agree. I have a friend who works in the environmental work, and he says, look, environmentalism isn't a problem. It's a predicament. And he said there's a difference between a problem and a dilemma. Because problems, you just have a solution. You fix it. This thing broke, you fix it, you move on. But a predicament is this major drama, which requires multiple responses over time. And that's what we're dealing with here, are multiple responses. And none of it's going to work on its own. It's not the point. The point is for all of us to respond and not just react in ways over time that we feel like can be life-sustaining. And the one thing human beings can do is to develop adaptive patterns of response. And self-sacrificing, there is no God rewarding your sacrifice. There is no karmic payback for you depleting yourself. It's not how exchange works. You having a full heart that's fully blazing, caring for people when you can, that is what you can do. But we live in this world where we think, we all do a lot of magical thinking about a lot of things. It's easy to pick on other people's magical thinking, but in the progressive, like social justice, engagement, respond to crisis world, there's a lot of like subtext that is, you should do a little more. And then you mix in a little bit of, some American work ethic and a little bit of fear of the genie in the bottle and however we mix it all together in our heads. Boy, there's people who end up just, running out of gas, literally and figuratively, and thinking somehow that was a contribution toward the good. Now, again, whatever makes someone move, whatever activates someone, I've done many wild, goofy, crazy things that people are like, I don't know how that response fits. So I'm not judging anyone. I'm just saying we don't have to get caught up in a sacrificial depletion narrative in order to tell ourselves, hey, we're doing something. And if that triggers you, if that's something triggers you in your life, it's I went out screaming and yelling at night in the middle of the night, and then the next day I couldn't go to a protest. Like, I have to take in that, like, hey, and I still have a cold from it. Like, okay, maybe I can't do that in quite the same way, or it's going to have some effect. So, yeah, look, I think that's. And will you say HALT again? Because I've never heard that. I mean, maybe in some of the worlds this is a very common acronym.
Oh, this is a core thing for newcomers. So we say don't get too hungry. That's the H. Too angry. We have, in one of the lines in our books, is justifiable anger is better left to those who can handle it. And the thinking behind that is that getting in a rage can sweep us so emotionally, and particularly for people who are new, they can medicate that. So don't get too lonely, right? The 12-step movement is a movement of solidarity as a collective. Nobody is supposed to be doing it as a lone ranger, right? Even people who are in the years of the founding of the movement, who were off in remote places, had a pen pal buddy, who would write to them, right? We don't do it alone. So don't get too lonely and don't get too tired. Like I don't know about you or Jayme, but if I get overtired,
Yeah.
I get too spent out, I get more fragile, I get more reactive, I end up saying things I shouldn't have been saying, whatever it is. So HALT, halt.
Great.
My gift to you,
I feel
Doug
like
Pagitt.
that should be a meme that people are spreading around. I think that's
Because we have to figure out how we're going to get through this. And I think the whole, the beauty of one day at a time, which is in Muller's prayer, really to think about, first of all, you can't live any other way. I mean, just, one day at a time. Well, could you please live next Thursday for me? Because I want to watch, right? We're only living this day, this hour together, the next thing, whatever. And to bring it back to that, because one of my danger zones is catastrophic thinking.
Yes.
I don't know if any of our listeners are struggling with that. I'm an Irish citizen. So, I get into these fantasies that I'm calling my Uncle John and telling him to go find me a cheap apartment and I'm coming. Well, I can't afford that kind of catastrophic thinking. I'm here in this place, I believe, for a reason. I think God will work through me if I stay right-minded and I welcome the grace of God in. If I stay anchored in as a true evangelical, anchored us so beautifully in the scriptures. And also for Catholics, we're anchored in the tradition. We're anchored in that beautiful trajectory of Catholic social teaching. We're anchored in the teaching of Vatican II. It's even in the catechism that you're supposed to act on behalf of the common good. So,
can I tell you this little? Somebody told me a little tale. I think it's Irish. It might be Scottish, but it's sort of this tale, and it's about this old man named Sid who lived a whole life doing a lot of good things for people, and spent his life sort of sacrificing for others. And he dies, and he goes before the Lord, and he sees the Lord. Sid says, "Well, Lord, I did the best I could." And the Lord says, "Oh, no, you didn't, Sid, but you done good, and I'm glad you're home." And I thought, isn't that a great phrase? Like, you didn't do your best, but you done good, and I'm glad you're home. Like, yeah, could we all have done more? Of course. Like, you got $1 in your bank account. You could have. Did you have a minute? Did you have a day? This, like, give it all. It's not what's required of us. And ultimately, let's call each other home. That old fear of, or that old saying that in the end, we're all just trying to walk each other home here. And it's really easy to start to believe that there's people in this country for whom we would be better without, and we want them out and they want us out, and here we go. And look, politics matters to me. I think it changes lives and changes the world. And I think some political movements are bad for the well-being of the planet and everyone who lives on them and all the rest of it. But in the end, the point is not to get some people out and more people like us in. In the end is that we're all going to make it and we can all find our way home. And that's missing in our society. It's missing in our political debate. It's just, so if that's your leaning, any of you lean into that. And if that kind of thing drives you out of your mind, well, just, I don't know, go think about something else. And sorry I said it, because I know that's really triggering for people who feel like, well, it's easy for you to say, or they have all kinds of reasons why exclusion can become the rule. But I think fundamentally we can have a better way of walking each other home.
Doug, thank you for a robust conversation. We're coming to the point where we think about final words that we might want to share with our listeners. So if you don't mind, I'll share a few words, then I'll turn it over to Reverend Trish, and then we'll give you the last word here, Doug. For me, I think what's ringing in my heart and in my mind right now are the words, since we quoted the Serenity Prayer. That second line of the Serenity Prayer is, God, grant me the courage to change the things I can. And I think in this moment in American history, some of us are feeling, what can I do? But I think that there is something about this collective where all of us together doing our small part can really do something big for the common good. So really appreciate the courage, the real courage that you and all our friends in Minnesota are showing to the rest of our nation here during this particularly challenging time. I'm just thinking as I pray this serenity prayer today, I'm going to say, Lord, give courage to all of us involved in this fight, that we might help to be more and more like our friends in Minnesota who are standing up for justice. Certainly here in Austin, Texas, as you may have seen on the news, we are having all sorts of folks standing up for justice and good as well. But y'all are at the epicenter. So thank you for what it is that you're modeling to the rest of us who are looking to you during these troubling times. There's so much here that we can all do together for the sake of the common good. And I just want the final thought that I have are the words that are attributed to Saint Ignatius of Loyola within our Catholic tradition. The words attributed to him are, pray as if everything depends on God, and act as if everything depends on you. If we all, during this new year, 2026, were to do those things within our sphere of influence, just imagine the light that we could bring to this new year and to our world. Reverend Trish, final words and thoughts on your heart and on your mind?
Well, I'm super grateful you came on, Doug. Thank you so much. You've really given me pause in a couple of areas of my own life, as someone who's preaching the gospel every Sunday. Yesterday was the feast of the baptism of the Lord in the liturgical churches. And, we all know what happens in that scripture. The voice of God says, "This is my beloved." Mm-hmm. And when we baptize, we're basically saying, this is our beloved. This is God's beloved, no less than Jesus was God's beloved. And I need to constantly bring myself back to that. I think what you had to say to us around the danger of demonizing the other, the danger of deepening the fractures, the willingness to act as if God's divine life isn't in everyone, which is certainly what my church teaches. That those are all ways of being that are antithetical to the gospel. And so I really want to kind of bring that again into my heart, because that's the area that I struggle with, which is judging and evaluating and condemning in my mind. I might not put it out on a Facebook post, but I've had a hard time not unfriending people. Yeah. Yeah. Among other things, so that's really been great for me. I hope it'll be something that serves others as well. And so, Doug, you get the last word. Anything you'd like to say to complete our time together?
Well, thank you. Just deep appreciation to both of you for this conversation and for having me and for putting out your podcast. It's really important, and I really appreciate it. I think when we say the word "we," who we have in mind says a lot. And that's a question we have to ask in our country. It's a question we have to ask in our faith, in our families. The perception that we have who's in our we, when we say we, the people, or we, the community, the work of the people, who do we include? And it kind of implicates when we say we should love one another. Who's the we and who's the one another? And so, I think Jesus's idea of you will show that you're my disciples when you love one another, I think is one of the one anotherness of Jesus was ever expanding. So I hope we can find a way to truly love one another.
Well said. Thank you, Doug Pagitt, author, activist, pastor, pastoring activist, and executive director of Vote Common Good, inspiring, energizing, and mobilizing people of faith to make the common good their voting criteria. Let's follow Doug at Doug Pagitt and Doug Pagitt1 on Substack. We also want to thank our listeners. Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I am Reverend Trish Sullivan-Vani.
Let's work for the common good.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. Keep the faith.